When you stop chasing an avoidant, something shifts inside them that they're not prepared for. It's not peace. It's not relief. It's shock, because the avoidance emotional world is built around predictable patterns. They depend on you chasing to confirm their place in your life, and more importantly, to validate their distorted sense of control. Your pursuit isn't just attention to them, it's proof that they still matter, even when they pretend they don't care. So when that pursuit stops, it doesn't just leave silence, it creates an emotional vacuum. And the human brain, especially one wired for avoidance, cannot sit comfortably in that kind of emptiness. Here's what most people never understand: the avoidant doesn't feel secure through closeness, they feel secure through control. When you were chasing, they knew exactly where they stood. They could predict your next move, and that predictability gave them a false sense of safety. It allowed them to feel powerful while keeping emotional distance. But when the chasing ends, the script breaks. Suddenly, there's no energy to feed on, no emotional motion to hide behind. The silence exposes everything they've been running from. At first, they rationalize it. They tell themselves you finally got tired, or maybe you found someone else. Their ego throws up explanations to protect them from discomfort, but underneath those stories is panic. Not the loud, visible kind, but the subtle psychological kind that creeps into their thoughts late at night. They start noticing the absence of your energy, the way the mornings feel quieter, the way the messages don't come anymore, the way their phone stays silent. They start feeling something they've worked their whole life to avoid: loss. Avoidants aren't as unaffected as they appear. What looks like indifference is often emotional paralysis. The silence you create becomes a mirror that reflects their inner chaos. They start thinking about you not because they suddenly want connection, but because their nervous system is now craving the stimulation your presence used to bring. The attention, the reassurance, the emotional intensity, that was their emotional fuel. Without it, they begin to feel empty. And here's the twist: that emptiness isn't about you, it's about them. It's the echo of everything they've suppressed for years finally catching up. This is why your silence is more powerful than any argument, any plea, any explanation. When you chase, you feed their illusion of control. But when you stop, you confront them with their own reality, a reality where they can't manipulate energy to feel safe anymore. The vacuum you create forces their subconscious to panic. It starts whispering questions they don't want to face. Why do I feel anxious now? Why does their absence bother me so much? Was I really in control? In those moments, you become the ghost in their mind. They replay memories, not out of nostalgia, but out of confusion. They start to wonder if maybe they misjudged you, if maybe, just maybe, they lost something valuable while they were trying to protect themselves from getting hurt. And that thought alone begins to disturb their emotional equilibrium. Because for an avoidant, losing someone who genuinely cared doesn't just hurt their heart, it threatens their identity. It challenges the belief that they're better off alone, that intimacy is danger, that vulnerability equals weakness. What's happening inside them is psychological friction. Their old beliefs clash with new feelings of regret and longing. And this is where transformation begins. Not always outwardly, but internally. The silence becomes the first time they truly meet themselves without the distraction of your pursuit. They start to sense the cost of their avoidance, the loneliness hidden beneath their independence. And for some, this becomes the first crack in the wall they've built around their heart. You see, sometimes the most powerful move isn't to fight for attention or to prove your worth. It's to step back and let silence do the talking. Because silence has a language of its own. It speaks to the subconscious. It reveals truth without force. It shakes illusions without confrontation. When you stop chasing, you're not rejecting them. You're respecting yourself. You're reclaiming your energy from the endless loop of proving, explaining, and fixing. And that shift doesn't just change how they see you. It changes how you see yourself. So remember, this silence isn't weakness. It's evidence of strength. Because the moment you stop chasing, you stop feeding the illusion and start forcing reality to reveal itself. When you stop chasing an avoidant, something remarkable happens inside them, a collision. A collision between two powerful forces that have governed their emotional world for years, their ego and their fear. The ego says, you're fine without them. You don't need anyone. You're in control. But fear whispers something deeper, more vulnerable. What if you just lost the one person who actually cared? That internal battle doesn't play out on the surface. It happens quietly, beneath their words, beneath their cool exterior, in the space between pride and panic. You see, avoidants build their identity on emotional independence. They survive by convincing themselves that needing someone equals weakness. That vulnerability is dangerous. That distance keeps them safe. But when you stop chasing, that illusion begins to crack. Because now their ego no longer has an audience. The performance of being detached only works when someone's watching, when someone's still trying, still investing, still proving their worth. The moment you pull back, they lose the mirror that reflects their sense of superiority. Suddenly, their ego doesn't know who it's performing for anymore. And here's the truth. The avoidance ego isn't confidence. It's camouflage. It's the defense mechanism they built to hide the truth that they've been terrified of rejection their entire life. When you stop chasing, you pull that camouflage off. Their sense of control starts to crumble, and that's when fear steps in. Not the kind of fear that's loud and dramatic, but the kind that gnaws at the back of their mind. The kind that keeps them up at night wondering why they feel uneasy, why they keep checking your social media, why they're suddenly haunted by moments they thought they'd forgotten. At first, they try to rationalize the discomfort. I just miss the attention, or it's just habit. But deep down, they feel something different. They feel lack. They feel the emotional space you used to fill, and their mind starts playing tricks on them. The same person they pushed away becomes the person they can't stop thinking about. They start remembering how you looked at them when they were distant, how you still cared even when they shut down. That memory becomes an echo that won't stop replaying. It's the moment they realize that control doesn't equal connection. The ego hates that realization because it forces them to confront what they've been avoiding all along, that their need for distance is just fear in disguise. Fear of being seen. Fear of needing someone and then losing them. Fear of not being enough when someone gets too close. And your silence makes that fear visible. It strips away their excuses. It forces their ego to stand in front of a mirror it can't escape from. What's fascinating is how the body mirrors this internal war. The avoidant will often feel restless, anxious, even irritable, not realizing that what they're actually feeling is emotional withdrawal. They've been feeding off your energy, your reassurance, your effort. Without it, their nervous system loses its anchor. Their ego tells them, don't care, but their biology tells them, you do. That contradiction is what makes them spiral. They don't know which voice to trust anymore. And this is where your silence becomes transformative, because it doesn't just challenge their ego, it awakens their fear of loss in a way words never could. They start asking themselves questions they've never faced honestly before. Why do I feel empty? Why does it bother me that she's okay without me? Why do I suddenly want the very thing I used to run from? Those questions mark the beginning of self-awareness, not because you lectured them, but because your absence forced introspection. This moment is critical because now the avoidant has two choices. They can double down on ego, numbing the discomfort with distraction, or they can face the truth that the very thing they've been avoiding, emotional closeness, is the thing that could actually heal them. And while not all avoidants are ready for that level of truth, your silence plants the seed. It disrupts their inner system. It exposes the lie they've lived by, that detachment equals strength. When you stop chasing, you stop playing the role that enables their avoidance. You stop feeding the story that keeps them small. You give them the rare gift of consequence, the space where their ego no longer shields them from the truth of their own emotions. And maybe, for the first time, they begin to feel what connection actually means. Not control, not validation, but mutual presence. Because silence is not the absence of power, it's the embodiment of it. And when you withdraw with strength, you teach the avoidant something their ego never could. That true connection doesn't come from being chased. It comes from being ready to meet someone halfway. When you stop chasing an avoidant, something profound begins to unravel within them, their illusion of independence. You see, avoidants live under a quiet delusion. They convince themselves that they don't need anyone, that they are self-contained, emotionally sovereign, immune to attachment. But that's not independence. That's emotional avoidance disguised as strength. What they call freedom is often just fear wearing the mask of control. And when your chasing stops, when your energy, attention, and emotional investment vanish, that illusion collapses like a house of cards. For the first time, the avoidant feels something they've spent their whole life trying to outrun. Dependency. But not the kind that's obvious or physical. It's subtle, psychological, energetic. They start to feel the loss of something they didn't realize they were leaning on. Your pursuit was never just noise in their life. It was structure. It was a stabilizing force that allowed them to play their emotional games safely. You were the constant that let them keep running while still knowing someone was there. You were their emotional safety net. And when that net disappears, they begin to realize how much they depended on it. This is where the internal confusion begins. On one hand, they feel relief. The pressure's gone. No one's asking them to open up, to communicate, to feel. But then, slowly, that relief starts turning into restlessness. The silence begins to echo. They don't understand why they're thinking about you, why they're checking their phone, why their mind keeps circling back to memories they thought they'd buried. What they're experiencing is withdrawal, the psychological aftershock of losing an emotional supply they never admitted they needed. And here's the paradox. Avoidants crave emotional closeness just as much as anyone else. They've just been taught to fear it. Somewhere along their life path, connection became associated with loss, intimacy with danger. So they built walls, convinced themselves that isolation equals safety. But when someone genuinely invests in them, chases them, tries to understand them, it triggers both desire and fear. Desire pulls them closer, fear pushes them away. It's a cycle they live trapped inside, often without realizing it. But when you step back, when you stop feeding that cycle, they're forced to sit in the stillness that closeness once covered up. And that stillness is unbearable for someone who's used to emotional chaos. It exposes the truth. They weren't independent. They were codependent on your chasing. It was your persistence that allowed them to maintain their distance comfortably. You were the emotional worker holding up a one-sided connection, and when you quit, the system collapses. They start to feel the weight of that collapse internally. The same person who claimed they didn't want connection now starts to feel the emptiness of being unseen. It's disorienting because for so long, they believed their peace came from solitude. But solitude without connection isn't peace, it's avoidance. And the human psyche can only live in avoidance for so long before the cracks start to show. You might think they've moved on, that they've forgotten. But deep down, there's a growing awareness they can't shake. You are the only one who truly showed up. That realization becomes uncomfortable, even haunting. It challenges their identity. Because if they were never as detached as they claimed, if they actually needed your energy to feel stable, then the image they've built of themselves, the strong, untouchable one, starts to crumble. That's not just emotional discomfort, that's an identity crisis. This is where transformation can begin. Not because they suddenly want you back, but because they're forced to see themselves honestly for the first time. Without your energy propping them up, they begin to confront their own emotional poverty. And that confrontation, while painful, is necessary for growth. Because no one heals by being chased. They heal by realizing what they were running from in the first place. That's why your silence is not punishment. It's revelation. It reveals to them the cost of their avoidance. It shows them the depth of what they lost, not because you left in anger, but because you stopped participating in their illusion. You stopped giving them the emotional fuel that allowed them to avoid their own growth. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do for someone stuck in avoidance. Stop rescuing them from the consequences of their own behavior. In that quiet void, they begin to understand something that words could never teach. Independence is not the absence of connection. It's the ability to stand whole while still allowing love in. And until they face that truth, they'll keep mistaking loneliness for strength and distance for power. So, when you stop chasing, don't see it as walking away. See it as handing them the mirror they've avoided all their life. Because true awakening doesn't happen in conversation. It happens in silence. Your absence becomes their teacher. When you go silent, the avoidant doesn't just experience distance. They experience exposure. On the outside, they'll look completely fine, calm, unbothered, detached. They'll even convince themselves that this is what they wanted all along: space, peace, freedom. But on the inside, something entirely different is happening. A quiet panic begins to set in. Their cool exterior is nothing more than emotional camouflage, hiding the storm that's starting to brew beneath the surface. And that's the paradox of the avoidant. They crave distance to feel safe, yet that very distance becomes the source of their anxiety once you stop chasing. See, when you were reaching out, when you were expressing love, seeking clarity, or even trying to reconnect, their nervous system was engaged. You were predictable. You were the steady hum in the background of their emotional world. They knew how to navigate you, how to withdraw, how to give just enough to keep you close without getting too close themselves. But when that rhythm stops, when you suddenly go silent, they lose the script. Their emotional radar goes blank, and that's terrifying for someone who's built their identity around control. At first, they tell themselves they're fine. They lean on their old coping mechanisms: distraction, work, other people, emotional shutdown. But beneath that denial, their subconscious begins to react. Because whether they admit it or not, your absence is registering as a loss. Not just of you, but of the emotional stability your energy provided. Your presence, even when they resisted it, anchored them in ways they didn't understand. And now that it's gone, their body feels the emptiness before their mind can even rationalize it. This is where the silent panic begins. They start checking their phone more often without realizing why. They scroll through old photos, reread old messages, replay past conversations, not because they want to reconnect yet, but because they're searching for emotional grounding. They're trying to reestablish a sense of familiarity in the void your silence created. But the more they search, the more they realize how much space you used to occupy, and that awareness unsettles them deeply. Avoidants are experts at emotional suppression, but suppression is not the same as healing. It's emotional debt. Every feeling they've buried under logic, every vulnerability they've pushed away, every moment of intimacy they avoided, all of it sits beneath the surface, waiting to be triggered. And silence is the trigger. When you stop reaching out, when there's nothing to resist, all that buried emotion starts to rise. They begin to feel the tension they've spent years avoiding. That's why, even if they don't show it, they start to feel restless, irritable, anxious. They might even project, blaming you in their mind, convincing themselves you were too much, too emotional, too intense. It's their ego's way of protecting them from confronting the truth. They're not comfortable with peace. Your silence forces them into confrontation with themselves. And that's something the avoidant spends most of their life escaping. They're not just afraid of you, they're afraid of what closeness brings out in them, because closeness exposes their wounds, their shame, their insecurities. So when you go quiet, when the stimulus of your presence is gone, those buried parts of themselves start to speak louder. They begin to hear the voice they've been drowning out. The one that says, "You pushed away someone who actually cared." That realization doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in through the stillness. It appears in small moments, when they see something that reminds them of you, when they feel lonely even in a crowd, when they realize the new distractions don't fill the same space your energy once did. And even if they try to run, that truth follows them, because silence has a strange power. It removes the noise that once protected them from their own emotions. The irony is that while they may appear to be the one who detached, in silence, they become the one trapped. Their cool exterior becomes a cage. The more they pretend they don't care, the louder the internal noise becomes. They'll start to miss you, but not in the way people normally miss someone. It's not nostalgia. It's recognition. Recognition that the very closeness they feared was also the only thing that made them feel alive. And that's the turning point. Because once they feel that truth, they can't unfeel it. They can distract themselves, they can rationalize, they can date someone new. But the silence keeps whispering. It reminds them that real connection doesn't disappear. When the words stop, it lingers in energy, in memory, in awareness. And deep down, that's what begins to break them open. So when you go silent, don't mistake their calmness for indifference. Behind every cool expression, there's a storm trying to stay hidden. Your silence isn't rejection, it's reflection. It forces them to face what they've been running from. The truth that emotional distance is not safety, it's self-sabotage. And that's the beauty of silence. It speaks the truth that words never could. When you stop chasing, the dynamic between you and the avoidant begins to shift in a way that shakes the very foundation of their control. For so long, they've lived in a rhythm. Push, pull, retreat, return. It's predictable, it's comfortable, and it keeps them safe. They've learned to survive relationships by holding the power of distance. When you were the one chasing, their ego fed off that imbalance. It told them, "I'm desired, I'm in control. I can disappear and they'll still be there." That illusion of dominance was their emotional oxygen. But when you stop chasing, when you become still, their power collapses. The very dynamic that allowed them to feel secure begins to invert, and they can feel it happening. The irony is that avoidants often believe they're detached because they choose to be, when in truth, their detachment is a coping mechanism to control uncertainty. They fear emotional dependency, yet they depend on your emotional pursuit to define their worth. So when that pursuit disappears, the structure of their emotional world starts to tremble. They don't just lose your presence, they lose the framework that made them feel safe in the chaos. They go from being the one in control to the one waiting for something that no longer comes. You see, power in relationships isn't about control, it's about emotional leverage. And for an avoidant, emotional leverage is everything. It allows them to hide behind superiority, to feel wanted without being vulnerable, to feel powerful without risking connection. But when you pull back, when your energy is no longer orbiting around theirs, the psychological power dynamic reverses. Suddenly, they're the one thinking about you. They're the one checking, questioning, wondering what changed. The more you pull away, the more they lose grip on the narrative they built to protect themselves. This is where their internal conflict deepens. They don't want to reach out, but they can't stop thinking about it. They don't want to care, but they can't stop replaying moments in their head. They tell themselves they're fine, but their actions betray them. They start subtly searching for traces of you, scrolling through your stories, asking mutual friends, finding excuses to reconnect without revealing vulnerability. What's happening is psychological reversal. You've disrupted the emotional pattern they were addicted to. You've forced them into the position they swore they'd never be in, the one who feels uncertain, powerless, and exposed. And here's where the deeper truth lies. Avoidants don't fear rejection as much as they fear accountability. Because when they feel powerless, they have to face their own emotional limitations. They have to confront the fact that they pushed away the very person who made them feel alive. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting back every moment they withdrew, every time they minimized your efforts, every time they took your presence for granted. They start realizing that the control they thought was power was actually avoidance, a shield that protected them from true connection, but also from true fulfillment. It's in this state of power reversal that transformation becomes possible, because now they're sitting in the same discomfort they used to put you through. They're the one wondering if you still care, if you've moved on, if they meant anything at all. And that discomfort, that uncertainty, is the emotional pain that breeds awareness. Avoidants learn through consequence, not conversation. They don't change because you explain. They change because they feel the loss of something they thought would always be there. The absence of your pursuit creates an emotional silence that forces them to reflect. They start to realize that love isn't about who holds control. It's about who's willing to be real. And for the first time, they begin to see that control was never strength. It was fear masquerading as self-sufficiency. Your detachment shows them what genuine self-respect looks like, not manipulation, not withdrawal to punish, but quiet certainty. You're no longer chasing validation, you're embodying value. And that's what shakes them the most, because they've built their entire emotional identity around the idea that they're the one who decides when connection happens. But your silence, your absence, breaks that illusion. It shows them that you were never waiting for them to choose you. You were choosing yourself all along. That's the paradox of power. The moment you stop trying to prove your worth to someone who resists love, you reveal how much power you actually have. Not power over them, but power over your own energy, your own peace, your own direction. And that power, that calm, grounded self-possession, is the very thing that draws them back, because it's the one thing they can't control and the one thing they secretly crave. So, when you stop chasing, don't see it as losing control. Understand that you've simply shifted it from their hands back into yours, because real power isn't in being pursued or being desired, it's in being unshaken by someone else's fear. When the avoidant finally sits in the silence you've created, something begins to shift on a deeper, almost spiritual level. They may not recognize it at first, but what's happening is profound. Your absence becomes the mirror they've been avoiding all along. Every defense, every justification, every emotional wall they've built starts to reflect back at them through the quiet. It's no longer about you chasing or them running. It's about truth. The silence exposes the truth of who they are when no one is feeding their ego, validating their distance, or tolerating their inconsistencies. It's raw, it's uncomfortable, and it's real. The human mind doesn't like mirrors that reveal discomfort. It seeks distraction. And for the avoidant, distraction has always been their weapon of choice. They distract through work, through other people, through logic, through pretending they don't care. But silence offers no escape. It sits there, steady, calm, and inescapable. In that quiet, they begin to encounter themselves in a way they never have before. The very feelings they've spent years repressing start to surface. Loneliness, regret, fear of intimacy, the realization that they pushed away someone who genuinely cared. It's a confrontation with their own emotional architecture, and most avoidants are not built for that kind of self-awareness. This is where the awakening begins, not because they suddenly miss you, but because your absence dismantles the story they've been living in. They've told themselves that closeness equals danger, that dependence equals weakness, that love is conditional and temporary. But in your silence, none of those beliefs hold up anymore. Because if they were truly independent, if they truly didn't need anyone, they wouldn't feel that strange, hollow ache that shows up when they think about you. The emptiness exposes the lie. They begin to realize that their emotional safety has cost them something far greater, connection. And connection, at its core, is what every human being craves, even those who swear they don't need it. Because biologically, psychologically, and spiritually, we are wired to bond. Avoidants don't escape that wiring, they just suppress it. But when the person who brought that connection into their life disappears, their nervous system notices. Their body starts remembering what it felt like to be seen, to be cared for, to be emotionally engaged. Even if they ran from it, those moments left an imprint. And the mind doesn't forget what the heart once felt, even if it's been buried under layers of fear. So now, they're stuck between two worlds, the comfort of avoidance and the awakening of awareness. It's an uncomfortable place to be. Their ego still wants to protect them, to convince them that you were the problem, that this was necessary, that they're fine. But deep down, something else is stirring. A voice that says, you pushed away something real. That's the beginning of emotional accountability. And for someone who spent their life running from their own heart, that realization can be both terrifying and liberating. It's often in this space that avoidants start to see the difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone feels peaceful, lonely feels empty. And when you stop chasing, they finally experience the loneliness they've been projecting onto everyone else. That's when their perspective begins to shift. They start to recognize that your silence isn't hostility, it's truth. It's the natural consequence of their avoidance. You didn't punish them, you simply stopped rescuing them from their own patterns. What you've done, consciously or not, is introduce a mirror moment, a point where their external reality reflects their internal state. They start to see that the very traits they thought protected them, independence, distance, control, are the same ones that isolated them. And that realization hits hard, because it's one thing to lose someone's attention, it's another to lose their respect, their energy, their emotional presence. They begin to see your silence not as rejection, but as a boundary. And boundaries have a unique power. They communicate value without words. In that reflection, they finally understand something they never could. While you were chasing love cannot coexist with fear. The moment they chose fear over connection, they began losing what was real, and your silence only made that loss visible. That's why the most powerful thing you can ever give someone like this is not another chance, not more effort, but the dignity of your absence. Because absence teaches where words cannot. It reveals what pressure and persuasion never could. So when you stop chasing and the avoidant begins to awaken in your silence, understand this: you've become the mirror that forces truth to surface. Not because you set out to change them, but because you finally chose to change yourself. And in doing so, you remind them and yourself that love isn't proven through pursuit, but through presence. Because sometimes the loudest way to teach someone the value of connection is to let them feel the silence of your absence.